Redditors, what is the worst walk of shame you've had? How did it happen? Story 1. One of like 3 times I blacked out drinking, woke up in a nice bedroom with the sun shining in my eyes, rolled over and had zero clue who the girl was, quietly put on my clothes and tried to sneak down the stairs. Was obvious this was someone's parents' house. The hall was wall-to-wall family photos, etc. I have no clue how to get out of the house. I take a turn and there is the whole family, mom, dad, 2 sisters, and grandma and grandpa eating waffles. I mumble something about being sorry for interrupting their breakfast and sheepishly walk out the back door. I go outside and look for my car. I have zero clue where it is parked. I walk around the block for 10 minutes searching for it. I have no cell phone cause this is like 1998, and since this is obviously suburbia, there are no payphones in sight. I muster up every last bit of pride that I have to knock on their door and ask to speak to their daughter. I can't even conjure up her name at this point. One of the sisters answers the door, laughing her off. Her sister is upstairs getting yelled at by pretty much everyone but grandpa, who is still eating his waffles. I ask the sister to use the phone. Of course it is in the kitchen. I call my roommate and tell him to come pick me up at the intersection down the road. Whole time the grandfather is giving me the stink eye and the sisters are like in tears laughing. Roommate picks me up 45 minutes later because I am about as far across town as in physically possible, brings me back to the club where my car was parked. At least my dumb didn't drive there. Thanks for the gold, strangers. Story 2. One time when I was around 13 I was at a Bible study at a relative's house and I was super gassy. I felt a big gutbuster coming on and I decided the polite thing to do would be to excuse myself and go to the restroom and blow that foghorn. Well, I stood up and made it about 3 steps before I let out a quick pop and then proceeded to chainsaw my way across this quiet room with about 12 to 15 people reading the Bible. I stayed in the bathroom mortified until my aunt came and got me. Story 3. Nothing beats waking up in the house of a 20-something guy who supposedly had his own place, but then him expecting you to join him at the breakfast table with his stern-looking parents. Story 4. Went on a first date with a girl from an online dating app. Things went well, making out in a small pub. I accidentally set fire to my shirt on a candle, wasted, we didn't care, ended up staying at hers. Had to walk to work through central London the next morning in a half-burnt shirt until I could find a clothing shop and buy a t-shirt. Story 5. Many years ago, I hooked up with a friend who lived downtown. I had parked my car on the street before going to the bar the night before. We had gotten pretty intoxicated that night. Hence the hookup. We slept fairly late the next morning, both of us pretty hungover. I had entirely forgotten that there was an event that morning where they blocked off the streets, despite there being signs posted everywhere. So mid-morning I dodged my way through crowded streets to get back to where I parked my car, only to find it fenced in by temporary fences to block off the street for the kids' bike race that was about to start. My car was literally the only one left on the block. I asked a police officer when I could get it out, and was told I'd have to wait until after the race. So, there I sat on a bench on the sidewalk, visibly hungover, miserable, and surely ashamed, while a bunch of kids rode their bikes around downtown with their parents shooting me odd looks. Story 6. Woke up on my prom date's parents' basement pool table, still wearing the top half of my tux, nothing below the waist. My date was asleep on the basement couch, jolted upright and bashed my head on the light fixture hanging above the pool table, cutting my forehead open, could not find my underwear or socks. Walked home in snow and cold with a bleeding wound. Date's mom called my parents' house later that day, only to leave a message on the answering machine saying that she'd found my socks and underwear, and that she'd send them to school with my date. Story 7. I was dating this girl early freshman year of high school, and we were at her place when her parents were supposed to be out of town. She had this garage with a room above it that's about 50 feet from where I parked my car, all gravel in between. So her dad comes home without us noticing and figures out what's up. Unbeknownst to me, he takes my flip-flops. Later when I'm leaving feeling pretty good about myself, no less I can't find my shoes. Think, oh weird. Proceed to start the very painful walk to my car. Then BM floodlights from the main house, think like a mini version of stadium lights, blind me, and I hear ya, keep walking you little. I see you. The mother had stolen my shoes and turned on his motion-activated floodlights he uses to scare away deer. Also he could taunt me and teach me the definition of a walk of shame. Honestly a great guy, though we had dinner with her parents a month later. Took me that long to be able to face him and we laughed about it. But Jesus, first and last time I've done barefoot on gravel. Story 8. One of my best friends and I went to a club without the knowledge that a well-known actor from a famous Australian TV show was making an appearance. We didn't understand all the commotion in the club until we saw a poster advertising his appearance. We never heard of the bloke beforehand because both of us don't watch the show. Anyway, he came up to us and sparked a conversation, and I whispered to my friend, if you don't go home with him I will be very disappointed in you. She accepts his offer to go back to his hotel, but we don't know this bloke, he could be dangerous. I wanted my friend to enjoy her night, so I went over too just in case anything happened. So while my friend is having the time of her life in the bedroom, I passed out on the lounge. I'll admit I wasn't the best bodyguard. Hungover AF. I wake up in the early hours of the morning and they're both still in the room. I call my other good friend and ask her to pick us up from so-and-so hotel in the city. My makeup is a mess, my hair is naughty and looks like hair. I'm still in my town outfit which is tight AF and I slip on the complimentary hotel slippers. They're better for my exit than my bulky heels, right? So I did absolutely nothing but sleep and I walked through that whole hotel and out on the street. I could feel eyes on me with the obvious thoughts that I had a one-night stand. If only they knew I was just trying to be a good friend. Story 9, maybe not the walk of shame you're asking about. But a few years ago I accidentally shat myself at the very crowded I Amsterdam sign. I had a very sudden bout gastro, with almost no warning. I had to do the walk of shame through the crowded streets of Amsterdam, in a soaked pair of chambray short shorts. Story 10 posted this story in a similar thread before. Oh, I've got a great story for this. In college, one of the bigger sororities had almost weekly socials at their sorority house. These socials were just formal spring and summer parties. These girls were wild. Their brother fraternity, who was always there, was just as wild. To say that these parties were fun would be a deep understatement. My roommate at the time was dating the vice president of the sorority, so he went to these socials every weekend, and by proxy I was always invited. I was single at the time, so I was always game to party with these girls. There was one caveat: this sorority had a strict no guys sleeping over policy. This created an interesting problem. If you met one of the sisters that you had a rapport with, hooking up at the sorority house was not an option. Furthermore, pledges were not allowed to sleep anywhere else but the sorority house, thus making it impossible to hook up with a freshman or new pledge. The sorority's president, we are going to call her B, had achieved legendary status. If rumors were to be believed, she would crucify and steal all of the future children of any pledge that broke the rules. It was known, especially among the fraternities, that B was not to be with. She could put a man in his place with so much as a stare. Despite this, she was very attractive, tall, former volleyball player, pale-skinned brunette. Heaven help any young fraternity pledge that made a pass at her or behaved in any sort of chauvinistic manner in her presence. At best, she would destroy their masculinity with her words. At worst, she could get them blackballed. Have I painted a clear enough picture of B? Stick with me. These details are important for the climax. Oh yeah, small but important detail. B was also my roommate's girlfriend's best friend. Let's get to the night of my story. It was a humid Saturday night in late June. My roommate's girlfriend invites me to her sorority social that evening, but throws me a curveball. She tells me that I have to keep B company. Now, up until now, I've been to 5 or 6 of these socials and only had minimal interaction with B. Frankly, the stories of her righteous hammer scared me enough that I would consciously make myself scarce if I ran into B in the sorority house. My roommate's girlfriend must have sensed my uneasiness, and immediately assures me that she's actually pretty awesome if you get to know her, and that she only has that reputation because she's protective, and finally that B is totally crushing on me. I reluctantly agree to keeping B company, fully expecting to leave the social that night with one less than I currently have. Since this is already running long, I'll skip the finer details of that night and give the cliff notes. Scared as I was, B was surprising sweet to me. She drank a little more than I recall her doing in the past, and got very touchy with me. She fed me drinks well into the wee hours. Not being much of a drinker myself, this got me absolutely tossed. At some point we went to her room and proceeded to hook up, and did so quite loudly for a few hours. Here is the turning point in the story. She told me to stay with her. Remember how I said guys were not allowed to stay the night? The sorority president was breaking her own rule. Now comes the shame. Around 8 a.m. the following morning, my roommate's girlfriend, along with 5 other sisters, enter B's room. B and I are both naked as jaybirds under the sheets. Thankfully, when they enter, my roomies GF and the other sisters proceed to read the riot act to be about breaking the rules and allowing a guy to stay the night, and how unfair it is that their boyfriends are not allowed. B is silently listening to their concerns. While this is going on, I am nervously trying to grab my boxers off of the floor with my toes. I manage to get them, and slide them on under the covers. I stand up out of the bed and grab my clothes to make my hasty retreat out the door. Roomies GF stops me. Atlantic Fit, sit down, you are the evidence. At this point, I decided silence and complacency is my best course of action until this spat reaches its conclusion. After a few minutes of back and forth, B relents, and agrees to change the rules to allow a guy to stay 1 night a week. It was at this juncture that I got the feeling that this was a setup by my roomie's GF. As she was always complaining about how he could never stay with her because of the house rules, I slowly began to suspect that she had planned this with the other sisters and that I was just the catalyst to make this change. When the other girls left the room, I quickly dressed, assured B that I would call her, and left the room. The front door was on the other side of a breakfast nook that I had to walk through to leave. The entire sorority is sitting in this breakfast nook, discussing what just went down in BS room. As I pass through, they all fall silent, staring at me. Roomies GF says, "Thanks for your help, Atlantic Fit." As I shut the front door, I hear 30 sorority girls burst into laughter like a coven of witches. To this day, I have never felt so used. Edit for formatting. Edit 2 did not expect this much interest. For those of you that asked, the legend of my relationship with B is in the comments below. Many worse feelings than waking up in someone else's hostel room, sleeping 10, stark naked on a bottom bunk with no covers over you, than trying to find your underwear amongst about 5 people's piles of clothes. Story 11 used to work at a leisure center where we hosted kids' parties with a bouncy castle. We weren't licensed to have it outside, so we used to have it in one of the function rooms, and while setting it up we were asked to make sure no adults go on it because the ceiling was too low and they'd hit their heads. Anyway, one time my grandma hosted her birthday party there, and all the kids are on the bouncy castle. I already told my aunts and uncles that they aren't allowed on. Then in a fit of what I can only assume is temporary insanity, the inner child in me takes over and I launch myself onto the bouncy castle, and in one bounce I fly up and crack my head open on the ceiling. I'm wearing a white shirt and blood is flowing from my open head wound onto it. All the kids are screaming and crying. My workmates have to come in and mop up all the blood whilst I'm paraded past them on my way to AE. So yeah, no adults on the bouncy castle, guys. Story 12. I am 32 was in a play during an incredibly hot summer in London when I was 22, and the director's daughter was 31 and in charge of the lighting. She was visiting for 6 months after finishing her BA in Australia, living at home with her father and his boyfriend in London. We hit it off straight away, and after the first lighting rehearsal we went for a drink and then went back to her father's house. But she was on edge the whole time about being caught. We couldn't go to mine as I had family staying, and we were both incredibly horny, so we went to a local park. We found a hidden place off the path in the dark and spent the rest of the night having al fresco, falling asleep wrapped around each other on a bed of our clothes around dawn. When we woke up in daylight, it was very clear we weren't half as well hidden from the path as we'd thought in the dark, with just some ferns on top of a slight rise between us and the path, so we quickly got dressed and holding hands walked off in search of breakfast. We were walking towards these two 1,415-year-old girls on the path who were clearly coming back after walking their dog, and as they got closer to us they both started blushing and laughing behind their hands. They'd quite clearly seen all of us on their way in on the path as we slept. I've never been so confused about whether to laugh or be ashamed or worry about being reported for something, and walking toward them was excruciating and felt like it lasted for hours. I put my arm around so she didn't feel alone and styled it out, but man, that was awkward. Story 13. I temporarily lived in a hotel in a smallish town 7,000 for construction work for about 6 months. It was Halloween on a weeknight and lots of the construction folks went out partying. A woman friend and I made impromptu togas out of my bedsheets before heading out on the town. I crashed at her hotel that night, overslept a little, and walked back to my hotel along the commuter highway at 8 a.m. in only a toga. Story 14. Had to walk from a 45-year-old woman's house, which was out in the middle of nowhere but everyone knew her and the house. Had to walk from there to my parents' where my car was, and at least 3 people stopped by asking what I was doing walking out that way at that time of morning. Word soon got round about what happened. So much for keeping it on the down low. 2. In addition, was getting a lift home from a random girl. ID slept with a local girl whose parents were friends with my parents, and my dad drove past us in the car that morning. He stopped his car and said he'd give me a lift to go get my car. That was awkward. He never said anything to anyone, thankfully. Both times were me in my late 20s. Story 15. After a wild night partying at my friend's dorm, I woke up at her place to the beanbag carpet, and my clothing covered in vomit. I had to change clothes, gather everything in a trash bag, and carry it back to my dorm, which was a 15-minute walk away, hungover. And did I mention that my friend stayed with me the entire time, laughing at me and pointing? Man, those were the days. Story 16. A few to choose from. I started writing one and changed my mind to another. I'm pretty shameless, which is another way of saying I have my share of grinder stories. I opted not to share the OH moms on the way home and will be here any moment story, though my gay bros can probably all relate to having one of those moments when one of you in the situation wasn't out yet. Far worse though, was this one night where I was just ungodly horny and none of my semi-regular partners, like, all 2 of them, were around. This one guy was though, at a nearby hotel. His profile and picture suggested he was my age. Cool. I normally was a little more scrutinizing, and have learned a lot from those days, but like I said, horny AF y'all, against every logical thought in my brain, which wasn't doing my thinking, I agreed to meet him. I go to his room, Holiday Inn Express. There's a joke there somewhere. On his floor is at the same time as one of those post-prom parties where a bunch of kids get rooms so they can drink and not drive after prom, and you feel so sorry for anyone actually trying to stay and sleep at the hotel. So I meander past this crowd of high schoolers just hanging out in the hallway and nervously knock at the guy's door. He answers it. He is decidedly not my age. He is at least 10 years older. If I'm 20, I'm putting him in his early 30s at least, but I'm an awkward person and horny, so I went along with it. He immediately starts hugging me close. Which is weird, that's not how I usually start things off, but whatever, I just kinda go along with things. Did I mention I need to get OFF? We get in bed and he's really handsy. I'll spare details for brevity's sake, but he keeps making reference to how he wants to ride his words. I tell him I haven't done before and am nervous, but he won't let it go. Finally, I'm horny and curious enough to agree. He puts a condom on me and I don't even remember him lubing. Maybe he already was, or did and I don't remember, and climbs on top anyway. He's like super into this idea that he's my first. This initiates 5 of the more awkward moments of my life. He starts talking super dirty while riding me, like how does it feel to have your virgin inside me? I'm not a dirty talker, I just say things like good lying, all the while it actually hurts. I'm fairly big and he keeps bending it uncomfortable when he moves or adjusts. After a few minutes, I decide I'm just super uncomfortable and regret this. So I tell him I want to stop and just pull out mistake. He reacts in pain to that. I apologize, and just take my condom off, throw it in the toilet, get my clothes on and leave while he angrily gets on his phone to find someone else to come by. Of course, as I'm leaving, I realize how loud this guy was when he was dirty talking. So the same high schoolers who saw me enter this room like 15 minutes previous now see me leaving. Having heard most of that guy's dirty talk, you haven't truly lived until you've aborted loud and profane butt sex with a stranger in a hotel room and had to face the music from a barrage of half-drunk high schoolers who heard every word. Oh God. 15 years later, and this one still makes my stomach flip with cringe when I think about it. It was 2004, I was a freshman in college, and my best friend roommate and I used to party at the same house every weekend because her boyfriend's cousin lived there and I was hooking up with a couple of the other guys who lived there. This house was far off campus, and our dorm was on the opposite side, so it was roughly a 20 to 25 minute walk from dorm to house. So after a party, I wake up around 5 a.m. on a couch downstairs with no one else around. I panicked. I thought for sure my roommate had left me at the house and went back to the dorm without me. I looked around the couch. I couldn't find my shoes, my purse, my phone, my wallet, or my keycard that I need to get into the dorm, but I thought my roommate obviously took all those things with her for safekeeping to make sure no one stole them while I was passed out. I figured she was probably worried about me, so I raced out the door locking it behind me, like a good house guest does, and starting walking back to campus, disheveled, barefoot, and with no purse or phone. I'm about 15 minutes into the walk when the cold air starts to sober me up, and I wonder what I'm doing walking in the middle of campus at 5:30 a.m. barefoot. Everything starts to flood back to me. My roommate was upstairs staying with her boyfriend like she always does. My shoes were in the mudroom with everyone else's. My purse was in the bedroom upstairs where I always keep it during parties. Now because I can't get into my dorm without a keycard or a key to my room, I locked the door behind me at the house so I can't get back in, and I don't have a phone so I can't call anyone. I chose to walk back to the house and bang on the door until I woke someone up and they let me back in. It was so embarrassing that I couldn't even explain myself. Story 17. Got extremely intoxicated at my college basketball game and hit up my ex. Except I was dressed in a onesie, woke up in his room, think I'll catch the campus bus and just avoid eye contact with everyone. I go to look out the window and realize we were in the middle of a blizzard. So I had to walk in the freezing snow a half-mile through campus. Horrible experience. Story 18. Not mine, but my mom's. My mom went to a festival with a dress code, not completely sure what it was, but she was wearing a kind of skimpy Russian army uniform with a short skirt. My mom was 48 at the time, but she looks like she might be in her 30s, so she didn't look like an older lady wanting to look hot. She brought a fur jacket to go to and from the festival. At the festival she met a guy, went home with him, woke up and went out and called her friend to pick her up. So, my mom's standing outside in a skimpy dress with a fur coat by the supermarket in the center of Amsterdam waiting for her friend. He pulls up in his expensive car. He's quite rich and my mom gets in. People are staring. Mom looked like a Russian prostitute getting picked up by her pimp. Story 19. Well, mine was a stride of pride that quickly turned into a walk of shame. Strutting my way home after spending the night with a girl that I'd been trying to woo for a while. I was feeling good. It was a nice day, sun was shining, and it was only a mile walk, so I was a happy man. With a couple of 100 meters to go, that's when things started to go wrong. The late night takeaway that I'd loved only hours previously reared its ugly head. With my apartment in sight and my belly making noises reminiscent of Jabba the Hutt feeding, I took off at a run, or a weird hybrid run waddle to get home. Just as I'm reaching the entrance to the apartment complex, the floodgates opened, and the last 50 meters were some of the most shameful of my life as I climbed the stairs and got into the shower fully clothed and full of regret for that late night burger. Story 20. I was going to a fancy dress party where you wear anything but clothes, so bags, boxes, wrapping paper, anything but clothes. I had work the next day, so I thought I planned it out spectacularly. I took clothes for the next day into work because I knew I'd be staying at one of my many friends' houses where I could then get into work, put the suit on and away with the day. I ended up getting with this girl who was staying in the Travelodge in the middle of town, right next to my workplace. Vav, how convenient and amazing this was. Anyway, skip to the morning where I look to the floor and all that I have is a short pair of shorts and some trainers next to a pile of black bin bags. She was tiny, so there was no chance I was fitting in her clothes to get into work. I phoned my friend to tell him what had happened and asked if he could bring my clothes out. I told him I'd meet him down the side of the building by the bins. Clearly I was still shit-faced because I strolled out of the front of the Travelodge in my shorts, walked round the corner and sort of squatted behind the bins while I waited for my friend. This wasn't a dead end though. What I didn't realize was this was a shortcut from the train station through onto the main street, so there were hundreds of people walking through, many of who were working in the same building as me. Eventually he turned up, I threw my shirt and trousers on, went into work, cleaned up and carried on with my day. I think more than half of the people on my floor probably saw me, and it was only awkward because no one would ever ask or say anything. Story 21. Was at a university residence partying, went back to a girl's room, ended up vomiting, went to the laundry room at the end of the hall and threw my vomit-soaked wool sweater in the washer then dryer, passed out sitting on the dryer and fell sideways banging my head on the shelf beside. Woke up with blood on my face and pants, a shrunked vomit-stained sweater, was unsure how to exit the building and walked back to my parents' house. Took an hour through a busy enough area. Thank God they just put me to bed without asking questions. Story 22. This happened about 2 years ago, and isn't the stereotypical walk of shame. I was working in a drug rehab for about 8 months as a primary therapist. The place was poorly run right from the rip, and I dreaded going to work every day despite loving my actual job. But it was money, and I had just started wedding planning, so I had expensive deposits. Anyway, it was October, which means the census was getting low. For those of you who don't know, inpatient rehab has a holiday drought, where the number of clients you have dropped significantly. After all, no one wants to spend the holidays in rehab. So it's a Friday and I'm finishing out my weekly paperwork, excited to get home and play Mario Odyssey, which came out that day. I leave work, pick up the game, get home, and start playing. I get a call from Human Resources. I was fired, no reason given, but I knew why. Census dropped, money was tight, and I was the newest hire there. Now for the walk of shame. I had to go back into work on Monday to clear out my office. All the while, I had to face my former coworkers and listen to them feign concern and wishes to keep in touch. It was the patronizing that was the worst part of it all. TLDR got fired over the phone after business hours on a Friday. Had to go back into work long after everyone else knew I was fired and walk by all of them to clean out my office. Story 23 was on a business trip to do some late hours network changes at another location, then return back by train, had to squat while connecting some cables in the rack. Rip, yep, so much for the back seam of my pants, which meant that I had to do the whole return trip with my boxers peeking through the rip. Story 24. My husband and I have been married for 23 years and have 4 sons in their late teens. For as long as we've been married, my husband goes and gets me a glass of ice water after. It wasn't a problem before, but now the boys stay up later than we do. He tries to avoid them when he goes for the water because he feels like they know. Our house is small, there's no avoiding them. He calls his water run the walk of shame. I don't know if that counts, but it makes me laugh. Story 25. I woke up in the middle of nowhere in a house. She was borrowing it from a friend as she was on holiday. Anyway, I had lost my wallet the night before, so I couldn't get a cab out of there. None of my friends could come and get me. Last resort was calling my mother. When I got in the car, she just stared at me and told me to check myself out in the mirror. Lipstick and stuff all over my face, hair in a mess, sambuca stains all over my jacket, stank of perfume, booze and cigarettes. Awkward as, not my proudest moment. Funnily enough, a couple of years later I was at an airport arrivals in another country with a friend of mine picking another up, and out walks the girl I had hooked up with. I told my friend and he told me I was full of, which made it all the more funny when we saw each other and said hi and all that. Good times. Story 26. My girlfriend at the time stayed the night. I had just graduated high school, was still fairly new and exciting, and I was much more dumb in terms of understanding such noises. Certainly travel with ease. My bed sounded like a rusted swing at a park for the entire 7 minutes I was having. I was still living with my parents. When I emerged from my room, still erect and a cigarette dangling from my proud lips, I was met with the eyes of my glaring mother, who was sitting on our couch watching some murder show because she had woken up and couldn't go back to sleep, and I sulked. Oh, how I sulked with my head low all the way to the garage. Story 27. Oh God, I think this counts. So I'm 21, I'm a student in university, and I've been struggling coping with the stress of working and being in school and being away from home for the first time. My doctor prescribes me lorazepam to help with the stress and fails to explain not to drink alcohol on these meds. There's no warning label on the bottle other than may cause drowsiness. Do not operate heavy machinery. It's St. Patrick's Day. I'm about 2 weeks into my new meds. I am an idiot. I go out downtown to celebrate with a couple of girlfriends around 8 p.m. Around 10 p.m. is the last thing I can remember. To my knowledge, I drank about 3 pints and did a few shots. The next thing I remember, I wake up on a gurney in a hospital hallway with an 4 in my arm. I don't know the time of day, but I can see it's still dark out the window. A nurse comes around and tells me I full on passed out at the bar, and my friends called an ambulance to take me to the hospital. She asks me why I drank while taking benzodiazepines. I explained I didn't know it was an issue. She looks at me like an idiot fair and explains it's a really bad idea and ends up with me in the hospital with an 4 in my arm and ambulance bill to pay for. By the time I am discharged, it's getting light out. It's also snowing harder than I've ever seen before in my life, and I need to get home. A nurse informs me the buses aren't running. I call a cab. The cabs aren't running either. Cool, I'm effectively trapped. I should also mention at this point that I'm wearing just a party dress and tights, and I have no idea where my coat from last night is. Thankfully I've never been one for heels, so I'm wearing at least semi-sensible shoes. I sit in the ER waiting room for a couple of hours waiting for the snow to stop. About 3 hours go by and I just want to go home. I only lived like less than a mile from a hospital. I figure I'm going to have to walk. The hospital was kind enough to give me a coat from Lost and Found. It was a giant men's puffer jacket in pale blue and really complimented my party look and made me look like a crazy homeless woman, particularly with my disheveled hair and the remnants of last night's makeup creating majestic panda eyes. Off I go into the blizzard. It's the worst walk of my life. I'm unsure where the sidewalk ends and the road begins, and I'm sure I'm about to be hit by a snowplow, and I'm puking into snowbanks regularly as I make my walk of shame back home. I get onto the road I live on. It isn't the best part of town. I vomit violently into the snow. I see the only other human I've seen on this walk. A concerned-looking man runs over to me and just says methadone, methadone. I remember I am about a block from a methadone clinic that exists on the street. I reply to the man, no, thank you, I'm just hungover, and keep walking. To this day I have no idea if he was asking if I needed methadone, if I had any methadone, or if I was dying from methadone. Either way, it didn't feel good. I finally made it home and cried a bit before passing back out to sleep for the rest of the day. Worst walk of shame ever. Story 28. Not me, but at my college, 2 dorms were connected by the dining hall. The only way from one to the other was via the dining hall, or you could walk way around outside. Occasionally the disheveled, must-hair walking corpse of a freshman girl would half-trot through breakfast to get back to her room. On one occasion, applause broke out throughout the hall. Story 29. Las Vegas, June 2009. Met a girl in a nightclub, was pretty drunk, went back to her hotel room at like 6 in the morning. We start, Her friends then come into the room after also being out all night and losing the girl I came back with. She gets bitched at by her friends. I get bitched at for being a stranger and I have to leave. It is now 7 a.m. Anybody that has been to Las Vegas knows that as soon as the sun comes up, you automatically get heat stroke. Being my first time to Vegas, I didn't know this. I proceed to walk back to my hotel room on the other end of the strip while being exhausted, dehydrated, hungover, and having blue in the Las Vegas heat. Had no cash for a cab either. 010 would not do again.